Hey y'all, Melissa here with you today. And this month I'm going to be showing you how to do some different hacks to my Esma pattern, which is the one that I am wearing here. This is how it is originally sewn with this V neckline. Today I'm going to be showing you how to hack it to make a square neckline. And coincidentally, this is just general hacking tips. You can hack necklines on any patterns, not just this one, with the techniques I'm going to show you today. So I'm only working on my front pattern piece here. Now the next general rule is you do not want to change the width of the shoulder on your neckline alteration if at all possible. If you change the width of the shoulder, you're going to end up having to change your back pattern piece as well. So the more alterations you add, the more chance you have that you're going to end up with something that doesn't fit. So if we're just altering the neckline, say we wanted a round neckline instead of a V neckline. I could just take my pen and I could just draw in the round neckline, keeping in mind that I want it to maintain the same shoulder width. These are two handy rulers for making round necklines. So this one actually just bends any which way you want. So say I wanted to make a round neckline, I could bend it to match the shoulder and then round it off so that I have a rounded neckline instead of a V point. Keep in mind that on the bottom of a rounded neckline, you actually want it flat before you curve in. Otherwise, it will still look like a V. It'll have that little point. Another handy one, and I've got links to both of these rulers below, is to use something called a French curve. Okay, you can see this actually has a curve right here on the inside. It starts out flat, and I could use that to round off my neckline. It works better on a full scale pattern because this is a full scale ruler. I'm using a quarter scale pattern here, so these curves are a lot bigger than I would probably use on this actual pattern, but you just kind of shift it around until you find the portion of the curve that you want to use for your neckline, and then you can trace that out. Now today, I'm actually going to be sewing a square neckline. So let me show you how I altered my pattern to make the square neckline that you saw. The first thing I did is, again, you want to maintain that shoulder width. So I just kind of drew myself a really light reference line of that'll still match up with the shoulder. Then I didn't want to go lower than the V on the original pattern, so I lined up my ruler, and this clear ruler is very handy because you can line up these lines with the pattern and clearly see what you are doing. And I do have a link to this one below as well. So I just went from the point of the V and I went in. So like this neckline here. Now, a secret of square necklines. You generally do not want an actual 90-degree angle on them. And here is why. So if I did a 90-degree angle, I would be coming out here and then going straight up to the shoulder. Because women generally have slope from the shoulder out towards the bust, and then there's the slope of the actual bust, a square 90-degree corner won't necessarily hang as square. In fact, a lot of times what happens is when it's square, it ends up looking wider because of the way it drapes in the curves. It ends up looking like it is kind of a trapezoidal neckline where it gets narrower towards the neck and wider towards the bust. So most flattering and safest to do in general is actually to angle from the shoulder down and then straight across. Not at 90 degrees though. So the first alteration I did was to just cut out this little wedge. And then it's always better to cut out less at first because you can go cut out more. So what I did with my pattern piece at this point was cut it out of a piece of muslin on the fold, held the muslin up to my body and said, this is still a pretty narrow neckline. I want a wider square. You also gives you a chance if you do this to make sure that your square isn't coming out past like where your bra straps would, so that you don't have bra straps in the corners of your square. Once I had held up my muslin, I decided I wanted a little more width at the bottom. So I came back in, traced in a little further, and then from that point, angled up to the same shoulder width. So I cut out that little extra wedge And this is what my pattern ended up looking like. So then what you need to do after you've determined what you want your neckline to look like, and keep in mind when you're holding that muslin up, there is going to be a seam allowance taken off for the facing. So you actually want it to hit a little bit further in, or you want to cut off those seam allowances from your muslin so you can see where it's actually going to lay. So don't forget that you've got seam allowances here. If you did cut it and like it lays exactly where you want it, then what you would need to do before you trace this off or cut it out is you would go add seam allowances back on. Once you have that neckline finished, then we need to create a new facing. So I'm just going to trace the neckline here. I'm even going to go onto the shoulder a little bit. Now on this particular pattern, the back neckline facing piece is 1 3/4 inches wide at the shoulder. In fact, the whole facing piece from this pattern is 1 3/4 inches wide. So what I need to do now is I need to go measure in 1 3/4 inches on that shoulder seam, draw that line, 1 3/4 inches from the horizontal one, like I'm just copying these out and making sure that they all actually touch. Okay, so this piece would be my facing that I would cut out for the front neckline. Let's check out how to sew this now. Here is my top. I finished everything except for the neckline. And the neckline is one of the last steps in this pattern, and necklines in general are one of the last steps to finish. So I've got that. I'm going to set that aside and show you what I've done to prepare the facing. So here's the facing. I started by sewing the back and front facings together at the shoulder seams. Okay, you can see right here. And I did add fusible interfacing to my facings. That's just going to add some extra support to the facing. I also went and I stitched a basting stitch 1/2 inch in from the outside edge of my facing. The reason I did that is because then I could lay my facing wrong side up and press using that basting stitch as a guide. I could have marked this with a fabric marking pen as well, but I prefer to do this with a basting stitch because it gives me something that I can actually feel, not just see, to turn the edges of the facing. I also here at the bottom, here's how I folded it up. So I did straight across the bottom on that basting line first, and then I folded the 2 side seams in. Now this is all going to get stitched down right along the edge, just like the one that I am wearing. So I wasn't worried about making a super neat mitered corner here. What I'm going to need to do next, the next step, first of all, if you're using really shifty fabric, you might want to consider stay stitching the neckline. This is rayon challis, but I have starched it so much that I felt like it was okay without the stay stitching. And then you want to match up your facing to your neckline right sides together. I like to pin at an angle in these corners here because that makes it easier for me to see when I'm stitching and I've gotten to where I might need to stop and turn. And then you want to match up the shoulder seams as well. So the shoulder seams of the facing match up with the shoulder seams of the garment. And then just add in extra pins to keep everything laying flat together. Just kind of a couple as needed. And then I'm going to take this to the machine and I'm going to stitch it. Now, I do have a video that goes through all the process of stitching a neckline facing, like every single step. So I'm linking that below and I'm going to refer you to that for all the steps. When I bring this back to this camera, I'm just going to be showing you how it looks when it's finished. So make sure to sharply turn there at those square corners and then continue. Before we get into understitching or pressing any of this, it is important with a square neckline to go ahead and clip into those stitched corners as close as you can get to the stitching without going through it. And that's just going to allow you the freedom to turn this. So I'll show you what this looks like after I've understitched and pressed and top stitched it. Before I go on to top stitching, I just want to take a moment and point out here that around this square, you're going to understitch and then like actually cut your thread when you get to that corner and then start again on the narrow side, cut the thread and start again. So it gets done in 3 little sections there, and it's not necessarily connected at the corner here, and that's fine because all you're trying to do is make sure that the fabric right along the neckline is connected, and this will then be a nice sharp corner, and we can top stitch. Okay, here is my top stitched and finished facing, and you can see now that I've got this lovely square neckline. Now all this month I'm going to be doing hacks to this particular pattern, the Esma pattern, so check out this playlist and see more of them.